Hello everyone. So now is the panel called the Scalability Endgame, which is the future Finality series that we're recording live for East Denver. And I'm having this great pleasure to moderate this fireside chat between Near's founder Illia and Ethereum's core researcher Ansgar. And today we're going to talk about how do we actually, scale Ethereum, scale Near, and scale, the whole crypto industry to get more and more adoption. But first, let's start a quick intro. So my name is Amos. I'm the founder of MetaWeb Ventures. We're a $30 million early stage incubator style fund. We're also very research driven. So there are the two primary ecosystems that we invest are actually Near and Ethereum. Hence the reason why I'm doing this fireside chat today. And Ansgar, would you do the pleasure to introduce a bit about yourself as well?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Ansgar. I'm a member of the Ethereum Foundation research team. Have been on the team for roughly a year now. Before that, I was at a similar Ethereum research team over at Consensus called Quilt. And have been working on several, I'm not sure how, have been working on several things. We have the feedback problem, I don't know. Several different things in the past, including account abstraction, scaling. Actually used to be involved as well in the research before Ethereum pivoted to the RollUp-centric roadmap. We had these plans for what we call execution environments. So basically the idea of sharding execution in an enshrined way on Ethereum as well. Was involved with that research. That was actually one of the first things I worked on when joining the team. So it's actually kind of, it fits the connection to Near basically because, yeah, you can maybe talk about how that's related.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here. My name is Illia. I'm co-founder of Near Protocol. Actually, previously I was AI researcher, which is funny that now I remember. But yeah, we started Near in 2018, been pretty much focused on how do we scale blockchains in a usable way. And actually, our research started by interviewing Vitalik and Justin Drake and Danny Ryan and kind of other core researchers to understand where Ethereum was thinking about scaling in 2018. And that's why, yeah, a lot of the kind of discussion ideas started from that and then over time diverged as kind of we were building out things.
Cool. So let's start the first question actually just right on the topic. So modularization versus monolithic blockchain have been a very trending topic for the past year or so. So I'm just curious, like in your opinion, what are like the philosophical differences between modular and blockchain and then like a monolithic blockchain? What motivate Ethereum to move from execution sharding to dank sharding, and what keeps Near essentially adherent to its original sharding roadmap?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. So I think basically the first insight with scaling blockchains in general, and I think that's basically where we still agree, and that's kind of, I think the key insight is just that you can't just keep linearly increasing the throughput of a single monolithic chain, right? At some point you just run into limitations, so the question is what can you do? And so you basically pretty naturally come to this concept of sharding, where you basically say instead of having execution in one place, you have like basically multiple different places where you have execution, and then you basically all kind of bundle them together onto some root system. So that basically, that high level description I think describes both the Ethereum and the Near approach.
And Polkadot and everything else.
A lot of it's not a very unique kind of insight. And so then the question is just how do you actually do it? And so where Ethereum also originally started was basically trying to take the existing chain that we have with the EVM and just basically copying that, spinning up multiple versions, maybe even giving them a more modern look, maybe introducing some WASM or something, right? Like we had all these plans, but still basically fundamentally designing these charts in-house, right? Having like a very opinionated approach, and then just spinning them up over time and increasing throughput that way. Where we at some point decided to go a different path is that just because going down that path, we discovered that there were so many different flavors of how you could do this, right? Like there are a billion different questions. What kind of execution system? EVM, WASM, something completely different. how exactly, what kind of rules, what trade-offs in the like how much scaling versus how easy it is for users to run nodes. There's a billion different questions. Do you couple finality? Do you not couple finality? Like there are many different questions where we would have to make opinionated choices. And we decided that instead of making these choices and going one specific route, we would instead open it up for permissionless innovation and permissionless experimentation. This is where you basically move from execution charts to rollups. So what Ethereum's kind of understanding of the space these days is we only provide infrastructure for rollups to scale, and we are not opinionated, right? It might be that a optimistic rollup, a ZK rollup system is the way to go. It might be EVM-based, non-EVM-based. We don't care. We just provide the data and we provide the settlement, and we let other people make the opinionated choices. But I don't like. So in the end, we end up in a pretty different kind of space. But I don't think it's something where we fundamentally disagree on what is feasible technologically. It's more that maybe Ethereum just basically went the less opinionated route. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, exactly. So when we started, our core perspective was how do we make this technologies easier to use and to build on? And so sharding, scalability is a instrument to achieve that goal. It's not the goal in itself, right? If you're building on something and it's out of capacity because some other app is doing something, that's not like a really good environment to build on. And so kind of we work from that perspective, and that perspective usually means you need to make some trade-offs and kind of build some opinions on how things should be to make it easier for developers. And so we chose WebAssembly as a core because it's a very kind of generic technology. It runs in every browser right now. It's supported by kind of a huge network of big and small companies. It's actually growing like in adoption extremely fast. And it has a lot of programming language and a lot of tooling available on it. So that allowed us to have like a very solid foundation. And then that kind of other opinions like EVM, like everything else, can be built on top of it. So we actually have, for example, Aurora, which is an EVM that runs as a smart contract on top of Near. So like you can build all of these environments on top using this kind of a very, in a way, opinionated but very generic framework that we built, right? And so we're kind of making decisions like that a lot to how do we create something that is simple to use but generic enough that developers can build whatever they need on top. And so that's kind of how we're designing it. And the complexity of sharding, of multiple different environments running is way too complicated, like for any user or developer. Like thinking about like where should I deploy, how's the accounts, tokens, fees, finality, propagation will be happening. As a developer, that's way too complicated. And right now people don't even think about it half of the times, right? And they should. And so kind of what we try to do is create an environment where it looks like it's a single blockchain, even though underneath we shard the blocks, we shard the state, we shard the transaction processing. But at least from a developer perspective and from user perspective, they see it as kind of one thing and then hide a lot of this complexity under the hood. And again, it's true, we're making some decisions while doing it, but trying to make them as generic, like enablers as possible.
Just one question, if I could briefly ask this. So, to what extent do you think about Near as like one monolithic system where you would, versus say a more modular, like would you ever consider say taking a specific layer of your stack and saying like maybe in addition to running things on our own chain, we are perfectly willing to also take our WASM system and deploy it on other chains as well, or we would. Or maybe the other way around. You're like instead of only having our own WASM-based system, you basically you would be interested in kind of bringing other people's system in. Like to what extent basically do you think it is like one monolithic kind of system versus kind of a more layered?
So the way I think about it, right, and obviously there's a big team contributing now, so there's a lot, like few different opinions. But the way I think of it as PC versus Mac, right? PC is like a lot of different manufacturers making different pieces, right? And they're trying to like all agree on kind of some standard bus and PCI things, and like there's a lot of issues with that. But it allowed this permissionless innovation. Anybody can make a thing. And then there's Mac, which is inside it's still components. And there's a lot of people working on different components, but it's all kind of integrated, like at the end is one product. And so that's kind of how I think about it, is like at the end we want to see one product for the users and developers. And although inside, like we have actually peer-to-peer layer is separate, you can use it actually for other use cases. Execution environment, I have plugged our execution environment into Tendermint. You can run our Cosm Near chain, for example, but like that's all like, cool experiments. It's not going to be a product. And so what we're trying to pull it all together into one cohesive experience. But yeah, I mean, inside it's all componentized. You can work on every component independently, and like they all have like their own APIs and interfaces.
Right, because just as a point there, because you were asking about like the differences in like mindset between monolithic versus kind of modular, and I think interestingly, I would even say kind of like this is both Ethereum and Near are on the spectrum. Like I wouldn't say Ethereum is the extreme. If you go to the very extreme of modular, you end up with something like Celestia, right? Where basically you really only take one layer and one layer alone and nothing else. And if you go to the very extreme of the monolithic case, you go to something like Bitcoin or Solana or something, right? Where there's basically no kind of like no multi-layer scaling approach at all. And I think Near is basically just like a little closer to the monolithic side, and Ethereum is a little closer to the modular side, but it's still both kind of on that spectrum, not on the extremes.
Exactly, that's a great way to put it. So let's actually switch gears a little bit and talk about value capture, because that's always like a very important part of any blockchain system. So what does value capture like look like, once again in your opinion, in like a more modularized blockchain design? How would the fee market look like? Are we making the token less, the native token actually less valuable? Like will ETH, for example, will ETH validator actually learn less after EIP 48, 44?
Right. Maybe do you want to go first for like think about it?
Yeah. So I mean, for Near, the idea is again to hide a lot of this complexity, and so ideally, like as a user, I don't want to even pay in the native token, right? I want fees to ideally be hidden completely, and I just want to pay a subscription fee. Like that's really where, and so Aurora have been prototyping that as an example, where you just you either stake some token or you maybe pay a subscription fee, and you get some amount of transactions per month from that, right? And like there's can be different tiers, and so you don't need to think about what's the complexity of the underlying, again, infrastructure, how much infrastructure costs. And that's kind of how, right now, you're paying for Netflix. You're not thinking about how many bytes have you received from Netflix of ingress from AWS, right? That's not something that like any user needs to think about. And that's kind of where we are right now, is like, how much gas is this transaction going to take? And so I think a lot of it, for us at least, like, how do we move toward that direction? And then underneath is build like robust systems for different players to, for example, for priority fees, to kind of be able to like still provide some service to people who need kind of a higher priority, and to buying out some block space in the ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because in a way you can think about transaction fees, right? They live in this interface between the native protocol and kind of the apps that sit on top, and in a way, they kind of like the Near and the Ethereum design, they're not that different, because I assume on Near, as you're saying, like Aurora or something, like it's kind of these big apps, they almost look like RollUps in a way, right? So they basically then, they would also be user-facing and hide a lot of the complexity in the same way that a RollUp, say, can make opinionated choices, right? If I run a RollUp, I can charge my users in ETH for the transaction, but I can also hide that away. I can have a subscription service. I can let them pay in USDC. I can make any of these trade-offs, and the place where the fees actually come into play is then the interface with the protocol. And the interface is just in a slightly different place. So for us, basically, you pay for slightly lower level kind of resources. You pay for the settlement. You pay for data availability as a rollup. And so these things we do charge in ETH. And so with we were kind of making one first step in that direction now with the introduction of EIP 4844. So we introduced a separate fee market specifically for this new resource we create, like the data. And that's all complexity that's abstracted away on Near, that basically that is more kind of lower level exposed on Ethereum. But I think as far as users go, I think at the end of the day, we are still very early in Ethereum, and if we project 5 to 10 years in the future, no matter what system the user will be on, what the underlying stack looks like, I think basically there's no future in which this is not all abstracted away. Like the user does not want to think about any of these low-level concerns. So I think, as far as users are concerned, these systems will end up looking and feeling pretty similar.
I'm actually curious if we project, like, let's say we take one of the rollups, and let's say that rollup become extremely successful. They will need to have multiple sequencers, which means they will need to have some consensus. They will need to have sharding, because one computer will not be able to process everything, right? So they will have sharding. They'll need to figure out asynchronous communication between shards. They'll need to have consensus, multiple sequencers. They'll have their own token. Why would they not decouple from Ethereum at that point?
Okay, but that's a really interesting question, actually. So, in a way, Ethereum is kind of like, as I was saying, we are basically deliberately restricted in what we provide, but what we provide at a very high level. So we basically, the only things we will provide is consensus on the execution chain. So you can do settlement on top of the Ethereum EVM, and you get very, very strong security guarantees. And then in the future, we will provide more and more data availability. And again, it's a very simple service. It's just you give us raw bytes, and we just give you this was available. Like, that's all. Like, it's a very primitive service, but we will do this at like a very, very strong level of security. So really, basically, basically what that means is as a rollup, even if it's multi-sequence or something, I don't actually have to solve full consensus anymore, because I already get full ordering from the base chain, right? That is part of the service we provide. The only thing is that you have to have rules for like who is allowed to create the next block or something. It's a smaller set of problems, so it's like you specifically don't have to touch the classic blockchain consensus part of it. And then also, more importantly, you don't have to deal with security. Basically, like, everything is out of the box at the highest possible. Like Ethereum, basically, there's no chain. I mean, arguably maybe Bitcoin, but Bitcoin with very limited functionality. There's no other chain in the blockchain ecosystem that has as high a security level as Ethereum. And I would argue after proof of stake now, we probably even beat Bitcoin, not on raw dollars spent on security, but the actual benefits you get out of it. So yeah, I think basically like these are like very, in a way, primitive, very trivial services we provide, but they are crucially important, and they're really hard to recreate on your own. So that's why I think basically, I think it's the other way around. What I would expect is over time, more and more of these, full monolithic chains to realize that what they're doing is not sustainable, and to move on top of not necessarily Ethereum, but some sort of maybe even on top of Neo, on top of Ethereum, on top of some sort of Celestia-based system. Like, I don't expect in the long run we will see any of these kind of roll your own consensus chains to survive.
I mean, let's see. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about something else, because one thing that both of you guys actually touch upon is actually the user experience. Which to me is what like Scalability should serve like in the end. At first, back in the days, back in the Bitcoin, early Ethereum days, blockchain are not very scalable, right? That's why you need all those like different solutions, because let's say if you want to buy a cup of coffee in startup, you don't wait, a minute or two for the transaction to confirm, right? Obviously, blockchain have came a long way to where it is right now. Both Ethereum and Near are launching a bunch of features or have stuff planned in the roadmap that are gonna significantly increase the user experience. So would you guys mind talk a bit about what you think are the most important features that can help Ethereum or Near improve the user experience? Can really start onboarding like a large broader set of users from Web 2 who are currently not related on Web3.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like, we always focused on kind of how do we make it simple to use, and so from the start, we actually implemented a account abstraction system, which was designed to allow pretty much a very flexible model on how people managing their keys, how the applications are deployed on smart contracts, and so that's been running since mainnet for 2 years now, and kind of there's few things we actually going to be launching in the future. One of them we call account extensions. So instead of just account abstraction, it allows you to pretty much enable different modules on your account. Similar how you would enable features. I want a multisig, I want a deadman switch, I want a proxy, I want a Twitter like authenticator. And so you can just enable those features all of them are independent smart contracts, and they will be plugged in into your account, enabling different features. And so it kind of allows to have a composable account model. But all of that kind of is serving a bigger purpose. And so we actually yesterday released what we call blockchain operating system. And this is actually a fully decentralized composable front ends that are built on top of the Near network that allows to pretty much build front-end applications kind of interacting with all this, including interacting with Ethereum and any other EVM apps. And so all of that is actually tying all of these things we've been building together to create a user experience on top of the blockchain. And in a way that's like fully flexible, fully composable, kind of allows you to explore what's happening on the blockchain without really thinking about the blockchain experience itself. And this is where like hiding the fees, hiding the complexity, hiding even the blockchain you're interacting with, and like maybe like we're working on allowing you to build an application that uses multiple blockchain at the same time, like a front end that allows you to interact with multiple blockchains. So that's kind of the experience we want to achieve is users just on board, start using, like log in with email, log in with a Face ID, and start interacting with applications. Don't thinking about where they're coming from, how they, what's the things they're bridging between, where the fees are coming from, and kind of, subscription fee type of experience on top of that to really enable them these interactions.
Right, and I think actually this is kind of this UX question topic is a really good topic to highlight where kind of, even though we have somewhat similar approaches, actually where there is like a clear difference, just because now with our kind of limiting ourselves on kind of the infrastructure side and providing the tooling for rollups, this is like the point where we basically do not want to be opinionated, right? So things like account abstraction, this is something where we have already seen in the past individual rollups launch with account abstraction. So Starknet had a native solution for that. ZK Sync launched with a native solution for account abstraction. But we basically specifically wanted this kind of this free experimentation. It's a little bit of maybe a cop-out though to say always, like, because you can always present a specific solution. I could say, oh, we just let anyone experiment, right? And like, oh, that sounds great, and it sounds like, sure, open market will find a better solution than a centralized player. But of course, I mean, in reality, if you actually kind of look under the hood, there's some asterisks here. So for example, a lot of the rollups today, what they actually end up doing is what they call EVM equivalence. So they actually specifically target the exact same kind of specification as the underlying Ethereum EVM system. And of course that means that all of a sudden they end up with the same user experience, right? And so a lot of the time what we end up actually having to do is that a lot of these solutions for things like account abstraction, and of course now hopefully you all have heard about ERP 4337, which is the Ethereum native version of account abstraction, but where that ended up coming from was not the layer 2s, it was actually kind of from the base layer ecosystem. It's not an in-protocol solution, it's a kind of pure like external standard, but basically it's something where just let layer 2's experiment was not actually in practice how this worked, right? In practice it was still the base layer community coming together, designing such a solution, and then now having it be like an opt-in thing where most layer 2s have already signaled that they will support this and over time will implement it natively. But it does mean that in a way, at the end of the day, for some of these questions, we are still in the same position where even though we don't want this responsibility, it's still like a standardization question, and sometimes even, of course, it's a trade-off space. So I think because we have, like, Ethereum does move a little bit slower on these things. I mean, you've had account abstraction live for quite a while already. We 437 is just launching this now, but it's a trade-off, right? At the same time, because it's a standardization process, we bring a lot of different players in. We have a lot of different perspectives. So as always, the reality is a bit more nuanced than the black and white. But it is I think philosophically it is a meaningful difference of kind of like focusing on providing really good solutions for users directly versus just leaving it up for, like in a modular mindset, really leaving it up for individual specialized players to come in and design solutions that we don't even want to be opinionated about.
Yeah, I think the question, as you mentioned, right, because they kind of still need a standard to be interoperable with each other, it ends up being a bottleneck that none of them can design their own independent solution. Otherwise, they're kind of gonna get like outside of this common group. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of it's good to open up, but like you still need a strong standardization system. So we actually been running standard work groups specifically for this that invite our community and we invite actually members of other communities as well to join to run this process kind of effectively and be able to push new standards and align kind of the whole ecosystem around this. Because I think that's actually, from infrastructure perspective in blockchain, this is the hardest part. It's not building the stuff. It's actually everybody agreeing that this is a standard and everybody is like integrating it ahead of time, pretty much ahead of launch, so it actually works.
Achieving human consensus.
Yeah, human consensus.
Cool. I think that's actually a very good way to always like take us back home, because it definitely showed that Near and Ethereum actually took very different approach when it comes to whether it's like scalability, standardization, and obviously usability. And I think actually makes sense because it's really hard to tell like what is wrong and what's right. And I think it definitely makes sense for the two different blockchains, especially at their different stage of growth. Obviously, Near is a much younger blockchain. It has more flexibility. Ethereum is like a much older blockchain with much larger community around the world, right? So I think both approach actually make sense. And let's see what's gonna happen in the next couple of years. So we're almost time. Any last word you want the audience to take home with them?
Well, I would just say that kind of Ethereum has only, like it's not been that long ago that we kind of decided to actually go down the roll-up centric roadmap. It's only been maybe 2-3 years. And I think we're only now starting to really see a lot of the experimentation. So while I think I tried to, in the conversation, caveat it a little bit and show that it's not just always, you can't just always shout experimentation and then everything is just magically solved. So it is a hard process. But I do think that like we are only now starting to get to the point where we will hopefully see more and more of kind of the fruits of all the different projects trying different things. And there's a very broad design space and a lot of projects. I mean, even just like Base, the latest kind of entrant here, announcing a couple of days ago. So I think we are pretty happy with kind of seeing all the different kind of experiments playing out. And I do think that most of the payoff of this approach is what we will see over the next few years. But I do think basically on the other side, that means that kind of basically what Near has today already, what basically Ethereum is lacking for now, is just like basically like a harmonized approach to scaling. I don't know if you would agree with that sentiment, but
yeah, I mean, kind of on the blockchain side, we focus on usability and kind of alignment across all of these pieces. But I think to leave everyone with one more piece is like the thing we did launch yesterday. It works across Near, it works through Ethereum, layer 2s. Actually, folks are already working on Cosmos integration as well. And so what we're actually harmonizing now is the front end, is the access point, is the entrance for the user. And really what we're trying to do, any wallet, any blockchain can support and use across this. And what we want actually to achieve is a standard for the front ends. And so if we have that, actually users will have way less kind of, onboarding into this and be able to use this across. And so at the end, I think that's the layer that really matters right now. Like I think we have enough of the infrastructure tech. I mean, the amount of like layer 1s, layer 2s that's just present on this is kind of insane. But the amount of applications that are really usable is very small. And so I think like it's time now to focus on that. And that's what we right now focus on. And that's what blockchain operating system is. And so if you leave with one thing, is that Near is the boss, blockchain operating system.
All right, we're at time. Thank you again, Illia and Ansgar, for this amazing conversation. If you guys like to see more of those content, we'll be recording more and more of those series online and physical events like this. So just follow us at MetaWeb VC on Twitter, and we'll see each other again. Thank you, guys.
thanks.